So the site we selected, we chose deliberately. We wanted to have a site that had some mixed use and some complexity in it. It just so happens that the way the master plan has been done, this site has absolutely perfect solar orientation. It faces slightly east of north, which means the first steps of producing a truly sustainable and a well-performing building from a thermal point of view is almost done for us. The master plan that was prepared identifies the site here, and there were 3 buildings. One of them was an office building that was standalone, and the other 2 were residential buildings. But it was disclosed to us at the beginning of the process that probably residential was preferable to commercial. Now, what we decided to do was rearrange the master plan a little in order to try to produce a master plan that took advantage of the thermal differences between residential and office and other land uses. So what we did was we took the office building and broke it up into smaller portions and placed it underneath the residential towers. Office buildings are a net exporter of heat. They produce heat. People produce heat, lights produce heat, computers produce heat. They generate energy. The last thing you want to do is put one of those in the sun on its own where it can absorb more heat. So we put them into the podium of the building along with retail to activate the streetscapes, and this sort of section shows our thoughts on this, and then elevated the residential buildings above, so the residential buildings can be naturally cooled. The area in the centre there where the arrows reach over and point to office is the main street that is designated in the master plan. We found the portion of land that is on the left of the screen too narrow to fit efficient parking in, so what we elected to do was steal the road and put the car parking underneath there. We also, admittedly, stole another idea from the car park at the law school at Melbourne University, which has tree columns where trees are allowed to put their taproot down the centre of the column into the natural ground below to allow large shades trees to establish themselves even though they don't have sufficient soil. The red areas are the office buildings. The areas that are uncoloured are the car parking. We've provided the required number of car parks within this development, although we'd argue that that's probably not an appropriate solution and our preference would be to remove cars out of the project. But we've provided them nonetheless, but we've recommended that they be included in a kind of carpooling arrangement that is owned by the body corporate, so that if you choose to have many cars and many parking spaces, then you have to lease them and you pay the cost. Everything we've done here has been about making people accountable for what they do. So we think the car parking should be user pays, that the energy used should be user pays, right down to the using of the drying facilities within the building would be user pays. If you use energy, you know it and you're accountable for it as you as the life cycle changes. You can choose to adapt to use less energy, to use less resources within the building. And we're proposing a kind of building management system that displays your weekly or monthly account within your apartment so that you're fully aware how much energy, water and how many car parks you've leased, how many bicycles you've taken out of the bicycle pool. Obviously, natural ventilation is critical. We found, and one of the things that Shane had asked us to do was to highlight the things that surprised us. How critical the orientation was probably shouldn't have surprised us, but it has. We always knew that obviously the best orientation is north-northeast, and that anything else from that you're working hard to compensate. What we did find is there's certain tipping points. There's points at which things change dramatically, and there is orientations where you can sort of live with it. And we hadn't realised how critical some of these points were. The towers that we've designed are generally single-loaded and generally facing north. However, the taller building, which has the opportunity for city views, all apartments in that building are through. They can have northern solar access or they can have city views to the south. The building's designed so that the car park is naturally ventilated via atriums, and Brian Whaley, our engineers, proposed that we not build slabs, etc., through the basement. We use ground anchors to hold the building down because it's cut into rock, either exposed rock, or we use decom granite to produce a permeable basement level. We're going to fall the basement to all these landscape spaces so that we can start growing landscape right from the very bottom of the building, which has lots of advantages. Obviously, it takes particulates out of the air from the cars, and also animates and makes those spaces more interesting. We've provided stairs out of every level so that you don't need to take lifts to go up a couple of floors. You can take a beautiful spiral stair in a landscape environment to move up 1 or 2 levels. All the retail spaces, all the office spaces have atriums adjacent to them, so there is the opportunity to naturally ventilate everything throughout the building. The outside streetscape of the car park has a green wall, so it's a very narrow space. It's not good amenity for the offices and it's wrong orientation, so we decided to simply enclose it in vegetation, let them rip some of the pollution that the cars generate out of the air and maintain the best possible air quality as we can. And of course all residential areas are naturally ventilated. The roof, we've got some PV. We're proposing to use gas powered fuel cells to generate the most of the energy to allow us to achieve a zero carbon position. So much of what we've done in this has been trying to use efficient construction, logical systems, and doing things that are real world that we can actually achieve. And for example, just the strategic use of the podium here. The tower to the right is the tallest tower. It is the tallest tower because the shadow impacts fall outside of our locale and it allows views back to the city. So all of those units are cross units that have views in both directions and outdoor spaces in both directions. The area on the bottom that you see with the grid light network, they're productive gardens for growing herbs, etc. They have the best possible solar access. The children's playground is in the shade of the building with one part of the building that gets good solar duration so that you don't have to worry about the children's wearing hats, etc. And then some recreational spaces that are collective as well. The apartment buildings, generally what we've tried to do is provide as much possible flexibility, and this is something that we started playing with during the charrette process, and that is to have apartments that last throughout the entire life cycle. The apartment on the left, which is a 2-bedroom apartment, is linked to a studio apartment via a little gated entryway. That allows you to either rent out the studio, you can rent out your 2-bedroom apartment and live in the studio. The next apartment is also interconnected. We have models where we've connected them together to create a 4-bedroom apartment. If you lose your job, you can live in the studio. If you get an extended family, grandma, I put my grandmother in a nursing home this weekend. She could have lived in the studio apartment next door and had her independence that she seeks, or you could have 2 families living and sharing this sort of interconnected network of apartments, which I think allows the sort of social flexibility that most high-rise buildings don't. I mean, you can do it in a residential home, but if you live in an apartment like me, it's very, very difficult when you've got 2 kids to have Nana move in with you. Whereas we tried to create here a framework that had some sort of social adaptability as well. We've also included gardens, and the gardens happen every 2 levels, except in one instance where it's every 3 levels. And the idea of those gardens, which are the area that you can see on the left here, is that they provide some connection to landscape to everybody. They have communal drying courts, which use the stack effect to draw air through there and cool the clothes quickly. And we'd say that there's probably a clothes dryer in there as well that's coin operated or something to keep you accountable if you need to dry things, particularly on a very wet, humid day. I'll keep moving quickly. One of the more interesting things that we found was because of our orientation of our building, the prevailing wind directions don't work with our solar orientation. And one of the clever ideas EMF came up with was the idea of creating high and low pressure spots all over the entire facade of the building that helps draw air from one side of the building to the other. That became probably one of the most interesting architectural devices. You can see here on the right where we've been playing with these ribs that sort of extend and then come back into the building, allowing us to A, move the air around, but B, have an awful lot of fun as well. A view from the top of the building showing some of the PV cells on the top. The podium is almost entirely disposed as public spaces with retail ground level and then offices above. This is from the northwestern direction, so we've clad it in some operable screens and some landscape, and we've created this nice play of indoor-outdoor spaces for recreational purposes and as meeting rooms. The streetscape, a little detail shot of the facade over the office podium, and the glass areas would be obviously louvers. The car park behind a green wall. That was 5 minutes, wasn't it?
Thanks, guys.